Greetings to those who are tuning in by the YouTube channel. Thanks for being present with us in this way, and also so excited to be able to be here Sunday after Sunday at this extraordinary thing begun so long ago by my friend Father Bill. As those of you who are regulars at chapel to some degree know, there always is a topic for the Sunday. This particular Sunday, the topic is a one-word, not terribly common in use at the moment, constancy. And I always like to remember for myself that I came across the word, I was doing the math, I think around 1996. It was the subject of an essay by a Christian theologian and ethicist out of Duke Divinity, whose name is Stanley Hauerwas. I don't know if Stanley Hauerwas is still living, but his essay on narrative ethics and the focus that he attended to this idea of constancy has changed me enough that I remember it all these years later. And I put constancy in the topic lineup because for me, there's a very strong constancy addiction correlation that's possible. And I'd like to start there in terms of getting more relevant and meaty with my conversation with you this morning. Because what I've come to believe from years of engagement around this world of addiction, not my own, and being a part of a family that carried it on, and then coming into my own recovery, and then journey of faith, and then chaplaincy, and then here today, is I have this deep conviction that one of the most helpful ways of seeing what addiction is to think of addiction as bad attachment. And an illustration that was making me chuckle this morning when I was thinking about it on my drive up is there's a motif that we see in television, and I'm sure it's in books and movies and all that sort of stuff, but it's the motif of the bad neighbor. And maybe you've had one, maybe you have one staying in your house right now. Like, what is it they say after 3 days? Like fish, like they don't keep well. But I've been amused, there's a commercial out in the world today, many of you have seen, I think it's a real estate commercial, but where people say they have a new home, they love it, except they have an ant problem, and what they mean is A-U-N-T, and so Aunt Mabel and Aunt Francis and Aunt like come in, and they're all like over the place, and so this is a fresh conception for me, and I'm going to try and sell you on the notion that we could think about addiction as a bad relative, and this is not to exclude. A very common way in which people think about addiction is as if addiction is an adulterous relationship, right? Because what we find out is that as a loved one of a person who's addicted, we see the connectedness of the addict to their enactment. It hurts us to watch. For me, for example, with my mom and her drinking, it just was brutal. It was awful to watch my mom drinking. I can't imagine how it was for people who love me to watch me using. But I'm going to flip the script for a minute and pick on somebody else. I'm so glad that that little one's here. And so when the reason I want to bring this up is because the issues of constancy have to do also with loyalty and fidelity and stick-to-itiveness. Like another word I like is solidarity. When a relationship coheres, and my point is that the addicted person is very faithful, very loyal, very consistent to the relationship they have with this crap. And it may not have been obvious to you. It's like, because those of us who watch a person spiral out of that may feel betrayed, may feel bewildered, may feel really bitchy, like angry about like what the hell, because this person is suddenly not showing up. They're like, their enactment is, that's a good word, because they enact. I remember my own guilt. I'm going to flip all around here. I remember doing lines in the bathroom at family holidays. And I wonder how my parents would have felt had I been honest about it, although they were drinking too. But somehow the doing lines feels to me like a much bigger crossing the line. I want to say I was just a social crack addict, but
There's something to this, and if you allow me to carry this metaphor through to the message, I think I can maybe persuade you that this is a way of thinking about what addiction is. It's a misplacement of this hardware of fidelity. It's a misplacement of the hardware of connection. You and I have the capacity to connect, and we're meant to connect. We yearn to connect. And it's, you see this with babies and the infant-mom bond, especially powerful, where there's a mother that can provide this mother-child attachment, especially in very, very close to the delivery time, the skin-to-skin contact and all this stuff. And one of my family members' son and his girlfriend just got kittens, and I'm watching them, and we were joking about them trying to pair bond with these little monsters. And why do we have pets? Because pets also give us a chance to practice this form of being that as human beings we are wired to enact, which is to connect. We love, we fit, we belong in communities of connection. And it's one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful force in human existence. And unfortunately, this is why it feels so awful for me, it was awful when I watched my mom attach to Tanqueray. And I bet each of you can think about the awfulness of someone's attachment, maybe your own. And if you have the awakening here in treatment of what it felt like for others to watch you attach, that's a really painful but important awareness. You, the person who's wearing the wristband, the patient here, can be seen as having fallen in love with whatever it is, gambling, shopping, food-related disorders, certainly substance use disorder. I'm always amused by people who say I'm an alcoholic, not an addict. Careful, that's a funny distinction. But, and I have in my mind a mental outline, so I'm going to try and stay with it and not chew up too much time today. The second thing I wanted to talk about, besides the idea of addiction as this toxic attachment, was faith. And faith as a form of attachment also. And I say it pretty much every Sunday, but when I first entered my period of abstinence from alcohol and other substances, I identified as an atheist. I did not believe in God. I was pretty darn sure there was not a God. And I had a narrative about it. I was into mathematics, I was into physics, I was into the sciences, I was into these kinds of things that I thought made the claims of religious traditions obviously absurd. And I would secretly pity people who were relying on, let's say, Jesus or Allah or the God of Israel or their Hindu beliefs, whatever it was. I could not see it. And to me, it seemed like a weird attachment, right? I felt like, what a weird attachment. Why would people make this attachment? But here I am, vested as if I am a spiritual care professional, which indeed I am. I'm ordained in a tradition, and they decided my theological claims passed muster. I don't know why, but they did. And I've been working on being a person of faith for I'm going to say 31 years or something like that. So in the first beginnings of my sobriety, I would not have identified as a person of faith, but I am a person who identifies as a person of faith today. And here too, there are things that have come to me over time. And one of the things that have come to me over time is that the God I didn't believe in was a Santa Claus kind of God. Like a God who answered prayers and who solved the problems of the universe and should be ending wars and fixing poverty and this was a construal that I made about the faith that I think I had been, maybe this went all the way to my catechism as a Catholic boy or whatever, but I think it was an underlying message, just like there's an underlying message about Santa Claus that turned out you have to readjust. But it took a long time for me to watch people have faith in situations where their faith persisted when bad things happened, to start realizing I did not really understand faith at all. There was a guy in an AA meeting that I used to listen to all the time. His name was Bob. I think he's passed away. Bob Sweetman. He helped me a lot. I think last names go shoot when people pass away, but so much sorry, Bob, for an interview break there. But Bob used to say, and he was a kind of old codger, sat in the back of his AA meeting in Angola, Delaware, and say, faith until tested is only a concept. And it bothered me. I was like, what does that mean? Well, then I experienced the desire to be a person of faith and experience significant suffering. One of the first dilemmas that happened with me was I was like working on praying and being a person who was like construing the idea of a higher power in my life, and my brother was murdered. And it was very destabilizing to this idea of connectedness to a power bigger than myself. But what happened eventually, over this long arc of my personal history, is that I've come to, what I rely upon my relationship with God as I speak of God for two things. And really they're very close, so maybe they're two aspects of the same thing. I rely on the God of my understanding for constancy, for presence, for solidarity, meaning that I will allow myself to believe on the crappiest day, in the worst of circumstances, that God is accompanying me. And I believe in a persevering God, like a God that like will not ditch me in the back alley, like will not, and that in fact one of the things I can do is I can reach to this. I was with family a few weeks ago in Iowa, and one of my sister-in-law from a deceased brother was there, and she was talking about her faith, and what she said, which was really remarkable to me because it speaks into this thing about what it's weird to believe it and to have not believed. But what she said was that as she experienced one after another calamity in her life, including the death of my brother, like just one after another thing, and she had a loved one commit suicide. She had, I mean, just like, wow. If you listen to her story, you'd think, wow, that's like it's like a Job story. That's like tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And she said, you know, people said to me, I don't know how you can believe in God anymore after the nth assault. And she said, I don't know how I could not believe in God. God is the only thing I have left. Because she's construing the idea of a higher power as a presence when all other presences fail her. I'm not trying to sell the atheist here. I'm just trying to tell you to understand what the nature of the relationship is. So the relationship, and I totally didn't get it. I completely, when I was ridiculing faith, I was not ridiculing that kind of faith, because that kind of faith understands that bad things happen, and that a prayer that a child would get well is only a wish. It doesn't mean that the answer the yearning will be granted. So I was headed somewhere. When people have this connection to a higher power, one of the ways that we get it is it can be handed on to us from childhood rearing in a faith tradition, or from belonging in a large community. And one of the reasons why I especially think of this, and I promise I'm not going to go deep down this well, I'm struck by what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, and the thousands of years of conflict that have happened there, and the fact that somehow this conflict, which I believe is over land, but is the story behind it is it's a story of faith. And my faith is better than your faith, or my faith is right and your faith is wrong. I'm not convinced. Where I'm going is that human beings not only have this history of attachment to divinity, but we have this organismic demand for belonging in small tribal community. We are constituted as communal beings, and we will form attachments. Like if we take random people and throw them together on some desert island, they would begin to sort of coalesce. And my guess is eventually you'd have a two-party system. Like it's just like, ugh. But because there are just weird ways in which groups of human beings organize. Or you'd have two factions, it would be the Hatfields and the McCoys, or the haves and the have-nots, or the people with the gray hair and the people with the purple streaks or whatever. And there'd be this demonization to some degree of the other, in a way that I just don't know why the Rodney King. Why can't we just get along? It seems we can't, and that one of the ways in which we manifest our difficulty to get along is tribal, is communal. We find ourselves and identify ourselves as parts and constituencies of communities of belonging. So people often ask me, because I am an interfaith minister. There's one in the back here, and that's a community of belonging in its own weird way. It's a fairly small community of belonging. I also am an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, so that's a community of theological belonging. I'm a member of the Abel family. That's a German ancestor that I just saw his immigration certificate from the early part of the 19th century. Came out of Germany, and I have Irish and Polish and Swiss, French background in each of my grandparents. I know what their heritages are, and I have a post-Catholic identity, and I think that's another thing that's funny about this belonging thing is we are called to manifest constancy in these relationships, right? To be a good Catholic, or to be a good Abel, or to be a good Jew, or to be a good Muslim, or to be a good whatever, and sometimes being a good this is to be a despiser of that, right? And there's a betrayal if you try to be an interfaith person and sort of see the love on the other side, unless you're Romeo and Juliet. It's like this bizarre thing. Anyway, where I was going is betrayal, and that this fits in the message of constancy, because this is what we experience. We experience imperfection. We experience. I believe we have this yearning for faithfulness, for loyalty, for connectedness, for reliability, and we have a fiction that it manifests. I remember the childhood fairy tales and the, sleeping princess and the Prince Charming and the frog that turns to and they lived happily ever after. This is the tagline. They lived happily ever after. When do I get that? When does that come, right? And then my fiction is, the lottery. No, if you study lottery winners, they don't experience it. It's just this, it's a lie. There are so many mythic distortions which wisdom in our own human development calls us to understand we have to challenge. And then I find myself having to dig down to the basics. And here there are several basics that are here in front of me today. One is that addiction was ruining mine and other people's lives. Another is that I am a being that loves and needs to be loved. I find in myself this yearning for belonging. And then I realize that I'm really talking about the same thing, because my addiction was this displacement of my yearning for belonging. And what the longing went wacky when I ended up going toward the wacky weed instead. I went towards this poison, the bad neighbor, because I didn't find my experience of attachment in my family and home context safe and sufficient. That's not an indictment of my parents. I know it sounds like one. I deeply have come to believe they did the very best they could. And they too were affected by the heritage of imperfect attachment that has been handed down in my family. I learned my mom's family secrets. My dad didn't live long enough for me to learn his, but I could guess. And so we looked like an intact family system, but the coherence of it was pretty darn fragile in my upbringing years. And then Johnny Walker Red and weed and cocaine and hallucinogenics and the culture of that, the world lured me with my yearning for belonging. And I became a person who followed that path in a way that my loved ones experienced as betrayal. So, I'm taking too long. There's two more things I wanted to get to. One is exile existence. My oldest brother, the one who was murdered, I think I mentioned that David was murdered in exile from our family. His illness was so bad that the attachment of the mother-child bond and the parent-child bond and the child-family bond was like everybody said, we can't do it. We can't do it anymore. His brokenness and perhaps the system's brokenness, it couldn't abide. And so my brother was kicked out of the family. He was shunned. He was anathematized. He was sent on his way. And some of you have had to get very close to that. In fact, some of you, maybe sitting here with your loved one, are like, I'm done. After Caron, I'm not paying for one more freaking rehab. I'm not paying for one more, whatever. But anyway, that's what my parents got to the point where they pushed their eldest child into exile. And they of course, they didn't say that, but it's a powerful word, right? And what happens when you're exiled is it's different than being a stranger out of the gate. Because what it means is that you have a place of belonging towards which you yearn and which you have lost. It occurred to me as I was thinking about the notion of exile this morning that I divorced a long time ago, 16 years ago. I noticed when I was filling out forms, I don't get to be single again before now I'm remarried. But when you're divorced, or even, some forms even say widowed, because that's an acknowledgement in some way in our social framework that people realize that the condition of being exiled from a significant attachment makes you different than a person who never had the attachment before. This is why I say I'm post-Catholic, because I can't somehow shake. I hear the Hail Mary and I'm like, I want to salute, and it's written into me who that is. So I'm going to a certain place, which I did also want to say. I think that some of us who come into sobriety have been in a poisonous attachment. We've been living with this love that doesn't love us back. That's the problem. That's why I say that addiction is a bad attachment. Because a good attachment, true love, Plato, I think, said this in the Symposium. True love is love that reaches the point where it will sacrifice its own needs for the other. Right? And an addict will do that. An addict will sacrifice their needs for the drug. But I have never seen the drug sacrifice its needs for us. So drugs suck. For that basic reason. They are not real relationships. Do not let yourself be lured into the lie. I'll take care of you. I'll be faithful to you when those people who are doing you wrong, blah, blah, blah. But when suppose you find yourself in exile, in treatment, and you want to get sober, and you would like to have your wife take you back, your husband take you back, your friends take you back, your siblings take you back, whatever, that's normal, right? Because you're in exile from that community. But they may be like, I don't know, you need to show me. I want 90 days, I want 6 months, I want 2 years, or we're just done with you. Dude, you have done this enough times for us. We're like, we cannot ever trust you again. Some of us have gotten to that point. What happens in recovery, which is fascinating, is that that's not a hopeless state. And it's not just in recovery. This happens with foster kids. It happens with all kinds of other situations. In human attachment, when the condition of exile is sufficiently broken, the person in exile can graft themselves onto another tree. They can seek to find substitute belonging. They can seek to sort of re-identify as part of a new community, right? And so LGBTQIA plus 2S, that whole string of alphabet is a group of people who largely form communities together in exile because loved ones and society have both overtly and covertly shamed and rejected members of those communities. And so this is why today we have, for example, and we call it Pride. We have a Pride track at Caron. And we have a way in which people who have been marginalized and experienced that sense of exile can begin to form bondedness and community. And this is the Jack story. I'm headed towards my finish, but it wasn't the case that my family wouldn't have taken me back, but it was my own brokenness, and theirs a little bit. I don't know that my family knew how to do constancy. I don't know that we knew how to do relationship well. So if I kept going, I remember I had a therapist who said, Jack, why are you trying to drink from a well that doesn't want to feed you, right? And so, or doesn't know how to feed you, a better way for Barbara to say it. And what I did, so I went to Narcotics Anonymous, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, I went to my sponsors, I went to my new recovery people, and they were my safe zone. My home group was a Thursday noon meeting, and I used to go there for Thanksgiving because it met on Thanksgiving, and I was so glad we actually met on the holiday because that was my safe point. And then I'd go have turkey, of course, at my mom's place, but if you wanted to know what was the highlight of my connectedness on Thanksgiving for the many years of my early sobriety, it was my Thursday noon home group. I just recently was back in the town with that, and I found that the meeting is finally disbanded, which makes me really sad because now I can't go home there. But the amazing thing is, I don't usually say this out loud, but I'm 34 years into my recovery. God willing, here on January 3rd, I'll be 35. It's amazing. But I mentioned, I was 16 years ago, my first marriage ended, and I experienced a major transformation in my sobriety. And the new Jack, post-2008, is a person who has been given family. I have a relationship, I have kids, I didn't have kids, I have 2 boys, 27 and 35, I feel like they're my boys, I have granddaughters, I just was with them this weekend, 5 and 10 years old, and we were just at a clan gathering. I'm grafted onto the vine of my wife's tribe. And it is the most important thing in my life. Sorry to the CEO here, but Caron is not the most important thing in my life. And sadly, there was a period of time when my work was the most important thing in my life. And I think it's a trap that many men fall into. So it's too much Jack therapy here today. Sorry. Why I say all of this is to set an inspirational vision in front of us. That there is not a person here who cannot reach for belonging. You may be able to reach home. You may not yet have been exiled, but I'm promising you, you stay in your marriage to your substance or addiction, and you will hit the bottom where people can no longer abide your ant problem. And yet, what's amazing is that the universe in 1935 began to constitute shelters, communities of foster belonging that will welcome us, even if our family is not yet ready to bring us home. And so, I'll go back and touch that faith point too. Like, there is faith to be had here as long as you don't hold the requirement that faith means that everything you want will be given you. Because that is not a promise that faith will deliver. But you do not need to be alone. Never alone. That was the Narcotics Anonymous promise. And I think that's why it sang to me in the aloneness of my heart. You do not have to be alone. You may find home here. You may find home in your home group. That's why they call it that. You may find home along the way. Trudge the road of happy destiny. That's what Bill Wilson said. Does it sound great? Trudge. A little warning there. But it is happy destiny nonetheless. Happiness, CBS Sunday morning yesterday, that's when CBS Saturday morning, had a big expose on happiness. And the big defining hallmark of happiness in human existence is belonging. So if you thought it was cash, if you thought it was the attractive significant other, no, it's meaningful relationship. And the substances and behaviors which have trapped us do not meet the ultimate test of that, which is that they will not give themselves up for our sake. So cash them in and come home to love.